The clatter of dishes echoed through the back of the bustling restaurant, blending with the rhythmic sizzle of meat hitting the grill and the hurried footsteps of waiters darting in and out of the kitchen. The air was thick with the scent of garlic, butter, and seared steak, but the atmosphere behind the scenes was anything but warm. At the far end of the dishwashing station, hunched over a massive sink, was an elderly woman, her frail hands scrubbing stubborn stains off greasy plates. Her uniform, plain, faded, and too loose on her small frame, was damp from the steam curling up from the hot water. She worked silently, her movements steady and precise, never rushing but never slowing either. Across the room, Chef Marcus, the head chef, glanced in her direction and let out an exasperated sigh. He was a tall man with sharp features, his crisp white coat spotless despite the chaos around him. He had worked in top-tier kitchens, trained under famous chefs, and prided himself on running a kitchen with military precision. But nothing irritated him more than inefficiency. And to him, the old dishwasher was just that, too slow, too weak, and completely out of place. "Hey, Grandma," he barked, his voice cutting through the noise. The kitchen staff stiffened. "You planning to finish those dishes sometime today? Or should we serve food on dirty plates?" A few of the younger cooks exchanged uneasy glances. They had seen Marcus lose his temper before, but this felt different. His tone wasn't just impatient, it was demeaning. The woman paused for a moment, then quietly resumed her work. She didn't defend herself. She didn't look up. That only seemed to annoy Marcus more. He strode over, grabbing a plate from the clean stack and inspecting it as if searching for flaws. He made a face and held it up. "This is still greasy," he snapped. "Are you even trying? Or are you just too old to do the job?" Silence fell over the kitchen. The other workers pretended to focus on their tasks, but their ears were tuned in. No one dared to intervene. The dishwasher remained calm, but something shifted in the air around her, something almost imperceptible, like a storm brewing beneath still waters. Marcus scoffed. "I swear, hiring you was a mistake. We need speed, not someone who takes a whole shift just to clean a few plates." He leaned in, lowering his voice, but making sure everyone could still hear. "Maybe it's time you quit, old lady. This job isn't for you." For the first time, the elderly woman stopped scrubbing. She lifted her head, her tired eyes locking onto his. And then she smiled. Not a nervous smile, not an embarrassed one, a knowing, quiet smile. Marcus frowned. "What's so funny?" She wiped her hands on her apron, picked up a plate, and held it up to the light. It was spotless. "This job," she said gently, "is harder than you think." Marcus rolled his eyes. "Oh, please." Just then, the kitchen doors swung open. A sharply dressed man stepped inside, his presence instantly commanding attention. He was in his late 30s, with an air of authority that made even Marcus straighten up. It was Daniel Carter, the owner of the restaurant. And the moment his eyes landed on the elderly dishwasher, his entire face lit up with warmth. "Mom!" The kitchen went still. Marcus paled. The elderly woman turned toward Daniel, her expression still calm. "I was just finishing up some dishes," she said. Daniel's gaze shifted to Marcus, and in that moment, the entire balance of power in the kitchen shifted. Marcus swallowed hard. He had just humiliated the mother of the man who signed his paycheck, and she had let him. But why? And more importantly, what was going to happen next? Marcus could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him like a heavy stone. The kitchen was deathly silent, except for the faint sound of bubbling sauces and the distant chatter from the dining area. His throat went dry as Daniel Carter, the owner of the restaurant, stood there, looking between him and the elderly woman he had just insulted. His mother. Marcus's mind raced, trying to process the situation. He had been working at this restaurant for months, and not once had he ever seen or heard about the owner's mother working here. She was just a dishwasher, another background worker, someone barely noticeable in the fast-paced chaos of the kitchen. And yet, the way Daniel was looking at her, the warmth, the familiarity, the quiet respect, made it clear that she wasn't just anyone. Daniel stepped forward, his polished shoes clicking softly against the tiled floor. He was a man known for his calm demeanor, his businesslike approach to running the restaurant. He didn't shout, didn't lose his temper. But right now, there was something unreadable in his expression. "Mom," he said again, softer this time, as if confirming to himself that she was really standing there. She wiped her hands on her apron, her gaze steady as she looked at her son. "Didn't mean to surprise you, Danny," she said with a small smile. "Just thought I'd keep myself busy." Danny. The name sounded foreign coming from her lips, so different from the formal Mr. Carter everyone else used. Marcus took a step back, trying to blend into the background. Maybe if he stayed quiet, Daniel wouldn't address what had just happened. Maybe, if he was lucky, he could brush this under the rug and move on. But then Daniel turned his attention to him. "Chef Marcus," he said, his voice even. "I assume you've met my mother." Marcus forced a stiff nod, his jaw clenching. Yes. Of course. I just didn't realize." He cut himself off, realizing there was no good way to spin this. He had humiliated an elderly woman, treating her like she was beneath him, only to find out she was connected to the very man who controlled his paycheck. Daniel studied him for a moment, but he didn't say anything right away. Instead, he looked back at his mother. "You didn't tell me you wanted to work here." She chuckled, wiping down the counter beside the sink as if none of this was a big deal. "Didn't think I needed to ask," she said simply. "I just wanted to help out." Daniel exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. "Mom, you don't need to be doing dishes. If you wanted to be here, you could have just—" He stopped himself, shaking his head. "Why didn't you tell me?" She shrugged. "Because I didn't want special treatment." Her words landed heavily, and Marcus shifted uncomfortably, feeling their weight. The irony wasn't lost on him. He had treated her exactly how he thought a nobody dishwasher should be treated. And yet, here she was, choosing to be in this position, refusing to use her son's influence to make her life easier. One of the line cooks, Jason, cleared his throat softly, trying to break the tension. Mrs. Carter," he said carefully, "would you like some water? Maybe take a break?" She gave him a kind smile. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Been washing dishes longer than you've been cooking." A few of the younger cooks chuckled nervously, but the mood was still tense. Daniel let out a slow breath and turned back to Marcus. "I'd like to talk to you in my office," he said, his voice steady but firm. Marcus's stomach dropped. He knew better than to argue. He gave a tight nod and wiped his hands on his apron before following Daniel through the swinging doors that led to the front of the restaurant. The dining area was warm and inviting, a stark contrast to the cold dread settling in Marcus's chest. Patrons laughed over plates of pasta and glasses of wine, completely oblivious to the storm brewing in the back. Daniel led the way to his office, a small but neatly arranged space tucked behind the bar. He gestured for Marcus to step inside, before closing the door behind them. Marcus swallowed hard. "Listen, Mr. Carter, Daniel held up a hand, cutting him off. "I don't want excuses," he said. "I want to know why you thought it was okay to treat someone like that in my kitchen." Marcus hesitated. He had been in the restaurant industry long enough to know how things worked. The back of the house was brutal. There was no room for weakness, no time for inefficiency. He had learned from the best, trained under chefs who demanded perfection, and he had carried that same mentality here. "I run a tight kitchen," he finally said, choosing his words carefully. "I push people to be better. I don't tolerate sloppiness." Daniel folded his arms, leaning against the desk. "And you think my mother is sloppy?" Marcus flinched. "I didn't know who she was." Daniel's eyes darkened. "Would it have made a difference?" That question hit like a slap. Marcus didn't answer because deep down he knew the truth. It wouldn't have. Daniel sighed, rubbing his temple. "My mother didn't tell me she was working here. She didn't have to. But do you know why she chose to do this?" Marcus shook his head. "She built this restaurant," Daniel said, his voice quieter now. "Not just with money, with her own hands. She used to cook in this kitchen before we could afford to hire a real team. She used to scrub these floors after closing. She gave everything to make this place what it is." Marcus's stomach twisted. Daniel continued. "She didn't come here to take over. She came here because she wanted to stay close to what she helped build. And you humiliated her." Marcus felt a sharp sting of shame creeping up his spine. He had worked in 100 different kitchens, seen chefs come and go, but this was different. He had disrespected not just an employee, but the very foundation of this restaurant. Daniel straightened. I should fire you. The words hung in the air. Marcus's heart pounded. But I won't, Daniel added, his tone measured, because I don't believe in throwing people away over one mistake. But make no mistake, Marcus, you need to change. You need to understand that leadership isn't about tearing people down. Marcus swallowed. I understand. Daniel studied him for a long moment before nodding. Good. Because if anything like this happens again, you won't get a second chance. Marcus nodded stiffly, then turned to leave. As he reached the door, Daniel's voice stopped him. And Marcus? He turned back. Daniel's gaze was cold. You owe my mother an apology. Marcus clenched his jaw, then gave another nod before stepping out of the office, his mind racing. He had survived the conversation, but somehow he felt smaller than he ever had before. And worse, he knew he had a long way to go before he could fix what he had done. Marcus stepped out of Daniel's office, his head spinning. The kitchen was still buzzing with activity, but it felt different now, like every glance from the staff carried a weight of judgment he wasn't used to. His usual air of authority had cracked, and he knew it. His eyes flickered toward the dishwashing station where she still stood. The woman he had humiliated. The woman who had quietly endured his insults without a word of protest. And now, she was still there, hands in the sink, calmly scrubbing dishes like nothing had happened. Marcus clenched his jaw. He had to apologize. He took a slow breath and forced himself to walk over. As he approached, the sound of running water and clinking dishes filled the space between them. She didn't turn to him, didn't acknowledge his presence, just kept scrubbing. He hesitated, then cleared his throat. Look, he stopped, feeling the words get stuck in his throat. He wasn't used to this. Apologies weren't his thing, but Daniel's words still echoed in his mind. You owe my mother an apology. The old woman finally glanced at him, her expression unreadable. He exhaled sharply. I was out of line, he muttered, forcing the words out. I shouldn't have talked to you like that. She studied him for a moment, then simply nodded. I know, that was it. No anger, no bitterness, no lecture, just those two words. Marcus frowned. That's it. She set down a plate and turned off the faucet. What else do you want me to say? He hadn't thought that far ahead. He expected resistance, maybe even some sharp words in return. But this calm acceptance of his mistake made him even more uneasy. You could yell at me, he said, his voice coming out more defensive than he intended. Tell me I'm a terrible person. Make me feel worse. She smiled, shaking her head. Why would I waste my energy doing that? You already feel bad enough. Marcus stiffened. He hated how easily she saw through him. Before he could say anything else, Jason, the line cook, called out, Chef, we got a problem. Marcus turned, grateful for the distraction. He quickly strode over to the line, where Jason was hovering over a pan of overcooked scallops. They're ruined, Jason muttered. Table 7's waiting, and we're already behind. Marcus groaned. The last thing he needed tonight was more mistakes. He grabbed a fresh pan, motioning for Jason to move aside. Watch and learn, he muttered, dropping new scallops into sizzling butter. The rich aroma filled the air, momentarily pushing aside the tension hanging over him. As he worked, his mind kept drifting back to Daniel's mother. Why hadn't she told anyone who she was? What was she really doing here? That question lingered, gnawing at him as the night wore on. Later, after closing, most of the staff had already left. The kitchen was quiet except for the steady hum of the refrigerators. Marcus sat at one of the stainless steel prep tables, staring at his hands, lost in thought. He heard footsteps and looked up to see Daniel's mother approaching. You don't go home? She asked, leaning against the counter. Marcus smirked dryly. Not much waiting for me there. She nodded as if she understood. A silence stretched between them before Marcus finally asked, Why are you really here? She raised an eyebrow. I told you. Just keeping busy. He shook his head. That's not the whole story. She studied him for a moment, then sat down across from him. I wanted to see the place for myself, she admitted. See the people running it. See if my son built something worth being proud of. Marcus frowned. And? What do you think? She smiled faintly. The food is good. The kitchen is strong. But, she tilted her head slightly. There's fear in your team. Marcus stiffened. Fear. She nodded. They work hard, but they don't work for you. They work around you. Big difference. Her words hit deeper than he expected. Marcus rubbed his face, sighing. I was trained in some of the toughest kitchens. If you weren't the best, you were gone. That's how I learned to survive in this business. She nodded slowly. And now that's how you lead. He didn't answer. He didn't have to. She patted the table lightly. Leadership isn't about making people afraid of you. It's about making them want to follow you. Marcus swallowed. He had never thought about it that way. Before he could say anything else, she stood up. Good night, Chef Marcus. And with that, she walked away, leaving him sitting there, staring at the empty kitchen, her words echoing in his mind. For the first time in a long time, he wondered if he had been doing it all wrong. The next few days in the restaurant felt different. Marcus could sense the shift, even if no one said it out loud. The kitchen staff still followed his orders, still worked hard, but there was something in their movements, hesitation, unease. He wasn't blind to it anymore. And then there was her. Daniel's mother moved through the kitchen with the quiet presence of someone who had seen it all. She never interfered, never acted as if she had any power here. But people noticed her. The younger cooks who usually avoided Marcus now seemed drawn to her. Even Jason, who had always been quick with a joke but tense under pressure, softened in her presence. She would offer small bits of advice. Nothing intrusive, just little suggestions. A different way to chop onions. A trick to keep sauces from breaking. And people listened. It grated on Marcus more than he wanted to admit. Not because he didn't respect her, but because she had built a kind of authority he had never been able to. Without raising her voice. Without making anyone afraid. One evening, the tension finally cracked. The restaurant was packed, the kind of Friday night rush that made or broke a kitchen. Orders flooded in faster than they could plate them, and Marcus could feel the chaos rising. The grill cook was behind. The runners were scrambling. Jason burned his sauce, and Marcus snapped at him, his frustration boiling over. Are you serious? He barked, slamming a pan onto the counter. You've made this sauce 100 times. Jason flinched, his face flushing as he quickly reached for another pot. Before Marcus could press further, a quiet voice cut through the noise. Enough. Marcus turned sharply. She was standing near the dish station, watching him with that same unreadable expression. The entire kitchen seemed to pause. His jaw tightened. This isn't your business. Her gaze didn't waver. It is when you start tearing people down instead of building them up. Marcus exhaled sharply. This is how kitchens work. Pressure makes better cooks. She took a step forward, wiping her hands on her apron. No, pressure just makes them afraid. And fear doesn't make good food. Jason lowered his gaze, pretending to focus on his work, but the words had already sunk in. Marcus clenched his fists. I don't have time for this, he muttered, turning back to the line. But something was off now. The energy in the kitchen had shifted. He could feel it, even if no one said anything. As the night wore on, the mistakes kept piling up. A missed order, a dish sent back, a steak cooked wrong. Every little thing added to the pressure, and Marcus felt like he was losing control. Then came the final blow. A VIP table, one of Daniel's personal guests, sent back their entire meal. Marcus stood frozen, reading the ticket in disbelief. The note was brutal. Cold food, bland sauce, poor presentation, not acceptable. He could feel the weight of everyone's eyes on him. His reputation was on the line. His control of the kitchen was slipping. And standing near the dish station, quietly observing, was the one person who had seen all of it unfold. Daniel's mother. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to, because at that moment, Marcus realized the truth. This wasn't just about one bad night. This was about everything he had built crashing down around him. And he had no one to blame but himself. Marcus stood motionless, gripping the rejected ticket in his hand. The kitchen noise faded into the background, orders being called, knives hitting cutting boards, oil sizzling in pans. But all he could hear was the pounding in his own head. A VIP table had just rejected their meal. Not just any table, one of Daniel Carter's personal guests. This wasn't some entitled customer sending food back over a minor complaint. This was serious. He felt his heart hammer against his ribs as he turned, scanning the kitchen. Everyone was watching him, waiting for his reaction. They were tense, bracing for the explosion. And that was the problem. They weren't looking to him for leadership. They were afraid of him. A flicker of movement near the dish station caught his eye. She was still standing there, Daniel's mother, watching. Not judging, not gloating, just observing, like she had already known this moment was coming. Marcus's grip on the ticket tightened. He wanted to lash out, to demand how a seasoned team could let this happen. But deep down, he already knew. This was on him. The way he had run this kitchen, the way he had ruled by fear, had finally backfired. His team was so afraid of making mistakes that they weren't cooking with confidence. They were just trying to survive. Before he could say anything, the kitchen doors swung open. Daniel walked in. The chatter died instantly. Even the servers passing through slowed their steps, sensing the tension in the air. Daniel's sharp gaze moved over the kitchen before landing on Marcus. He held up the rejected ticket between two fingers. "I just spoke with my guests." His voice was calm, but there was an edge beneath it. "Do you know what they said?" Marcus swallowed hard. Cold food, bland sauce, poor presentation. He repeated the words from the ticket, his voice tight. Daniel nodded. "That's right. And do you know what else they said?" Marcus shook his head. "They said," Daniel continued, stepping closer, "that the restaurant feels different lately. That the food is missing something. That our kitchen, our energy, is off." He paused, his voice lowering slightly. "And I think I know why." Marcus braced himself, expecting the words that were about to come. Daniel's eyes flicked toward his mother. She didn't move, didn't say a word. But something passed between them, something unspoken. Then Daniel turned back to Marcus. "Do you remember what I told you?" Marcus exhaled slowly. "You told me leadership isn't about fear." Daniel nodded once. "And yet, here we are." He gestured toward the frozen kitchen staff. "Look around, Marcus. Does this look like a team that trusts you?" Marcus didn't answer. He didn't need to. The truth was already written on their faces. Daniel sighed. "I should fire you." The words hit hard, even though Marcus had been expecting them. Silence stretched in the kitchen, thick with tension. Then, the second blow came. Daniel turned to his mother. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said," he told her. "About how a kitchen should be run. About how this place was built." He glanced back at Marcus. "And I've made a decision." Marcus's stomach twisted. This was it. Daniel looked back at his mother. "I want you to step in." A murmur ran through the kitchen. Even Marcus felt his breath catch. She blinked, clearly caught off guard. "Step in." Daniel nodded. "I want you in charge. At least for now. To reset the energy in this place." Marcus stiffened. He was being replaced. His pulse pounded in his ears. "Wait." Daniel held up a hand. "I'm not firing you. Not yet. But you're stepping down as head chef." Marcus couldn't breathe. "You're demoting me?" Daniel's expression was unreadable. "I'm giving you a chance to learn." The weight of those words settled deep in Marcus's chest. He glanced toward the woman he had once dismissed as nothing more than a dishwasher. And now, she was about to take his place. The kitchen was hers now. And for the first time in a long time, Marcus had no control. Marcus felt the weight of the moment pressing down on him. The kitchen, usually filled with the clatter of pans and the sharp calls of orders, had fallen into a stunned silence. His heart pounded as he processed Daniel's words. He was no longer in charge. The team he had ruled with discipline and fear would now look to someone else, her. He forced himself to look at her. Daniel's mother stood still, her face calm, but there was something in her eyes, a quiet strength. She wasn't gloating. She wasn't smug. She was simply waiting. Marcus exhaled sharply and stepped back. He had no choice but to accept it. The rest of the night moved differently. Orders were still coming in, customers were still eating, but the kitchen felt different. The energy shifted almost immediately. Daniel's mother didn't take over like a tyrant. She didn't bark orders or demand obedience. Instead, she moved through the kitchen with quiet authority, offering small adjustments, watching, listening. Marcus hovered near the edge of the line, unsure of what to do. He had never been in this position before, on the outside, watching someone else lead. He saw how she handled mistakes differently than he did. When Jason overcooked a steak, instead of berating him, She showed him a better way to gauge the temperature by touch. When one of the younger cooks hesitated on plating, she gently guided them, encouraging confidence instead of fear. And the most surprising part? The food started coming out better. The dishes looked sharper. The flavors seemed richer. Even the runners moved with more ease. Marcus clenched his jaw. It was frustrating to watch, yet impossible to deny. The kitchen was breathing again. Near the end of service, Daniel returned. He moved through the restaurant, checking on guests, taking in the atmosphere. When he stepped into the kitchen, he paused, scanning the scene. Then, his eyes met Marcus's. "You see it now, don't you?" Daniel said quietly. Marcus swallowed. He hated admitting it, but the truth was undeniable. The problem hadn't been the staff. It hadn't even been the food. It had been him. The realization hit harder than he expected. After the last order was sent out, Marcus stayed behind as the kitchen began to wind down. Daniel's mother was wiping down a counter when she spoke without looking up. "Hard night for you," she said. Marcus let out a hollow laugh. "You could say that." She nodded, finishing her task before finally turning to him. "You're a good chef, Marcus." He blinked, caught off guard. "Doesn't feel like it." She studied him for a long moment. Being a chef isn't just about technique. It's about trust, respect. When people walk in your kitchen, they should want to give their best, not because they're afraid of failing, but because they believe in what they're doing. Marcus let her words sink in. He had spent years perfecting recipes, mastering techniques, building a reputation. But he had never stopped to think about what kind of leader he was becoming. Finally, he took a deep breath. "How do I fix it?" A small smile touched her lips. "You start by listening." And then, the final twist came. Daniel stepped into the kitchen, hands in his pockets. "I've made my decision," he announced. The remaining staff turned toward him, waiting. Marcus braced himself. "I'm not replacing anyone," Daniel continued. "Not permanently." His gaze moved between his mother and Marcus. "But there needs to be a change. And I think the best way for that to happen," he looked directly at Marcus, "is for you to learn from her." Marcus stiffened. "You want me to?" Daniel nodded. "For the next few weeks, you'll work under my mother. She'll run the kitchen. You'll watch, learn, and maybe understand what it means to truly lead." A slow murmur ran through the kitchen. Marcus felt his pride clawing at him, resisting. But deep down, he knew this was his last chance. He turned to the woman he had once dismissed as just a dishwasher. Now, she was his teacher. And for the first time in his career, Marcus realized he still had a lot to learn. The next morning, Marcus walked into the kitchen feeling like a stranger in his own domain. For years, he had been the one calling the shots, controlling every aspect of the restaurant's operations. Now, he was stepping into the role of a student, a position he hadn't been in since his early days as a cook. It was humbling, uncomfortable, but also necessary. Daniel's mother was already there, quietly preparing for the day. She moved with effortless precision, arranging ingredients, checking the stock, making notes on a small notepad. There was nothing rushed or frantic about her, just steady, deliberate motion. Marcus hesitated for a moment before stepping forward. "What do you want me?" he asked. She glanced at him and nodded toward the prep station. "Start with the vegetables," she said. "Let's see how your knife skills are when you're not in a rush." It was such a simple task, one he had done thousands of times before, but it felt different now. He wasn't the one pushing others to work faster. He was the one being observed. He focused, slicing onions, peeling carrots, dicing tomatoes with careful precision. It wasn't long before she spoke again. "You work too tense," she said. "Loosen your grip. Let the knife do the work." He adjusted, trying to follow her advice. "You push too hard on the blade," she continued. "That's why your cuts aren't as clean as they could be." Marcus frowned, glancing at the pile of unevenly diced onions in front of him. He had always focused on speed, efficiency, but now he could see what she meant. This continued throughout the morning. She didn't overwhelm him with instructions. She just observed, corrected, and guided. And as the hours passed, Marcus found himself listening in a way he never had before. Not just to her words, but to the rhythm of the kitchen itself. The subtle shifts in energy, the way the team communicated, the small but critical details that made the difference between a good kitchen and a great one. Over the next few weeks, Marcus's perspective shifted. He saw his team differently. Jason, the line cook he had berated so many times, wasn't sloppy. He was just nervous, second-guessing himself because of the pressure Marcus had put on him. The younger cooks weren't slow. They were just afraid of making mistakes. And now that the fear was fading, they were getting better. The biggest change was in Marcus himself. He spoke less, listened more. When mistakes happened, he corrected them without tearing people down. And surprisingly, the food improved. The flavors were bolder. The plates looked sharper. There was an ease in the kitchen that hadn't been there before. One evening, after the final orders had been sent out, Marcus leaned against the counter, watching the team as they cleaned up. For the first time in a long time, the kitchen felt alive. Not tense, not afraid, alive. Daniel's mother walked over and handed him a small plate. "Taste this," she said. He took a bite. It was one of his own dishes, one of the first he had put on the menu when he became head chef. But something was different. The flavors were deeper, more balanced. He looked at her in surprise. "This is better." She smiled. Same ingredients, same recipe, just made with a different mindset. Marcus nodded slowly, understanding the lesson she was teaching him. It had never been just about technique. It had never been just about the ingredients. It was about the people. A few days later, Daniel gathered the staff for a meeting. The entire kitchen stood in quiet anticipation, waiting to hear what would happen next. Daniel looked at his mother first. "Thank you," he said sincerely, "for bringing this kitchen back to life." She nodded, stepping back, letting him take the lead. Then, Daniel turned to Marcus. "You've changed," he said simply. "I've been watching." Marcus exhaled, unsure of what was coming next. "I'm giving you back your position," Daniel continued. "But this time, I expect you to be the leader this kitchen deserves." Marcus felt a strange mix of relief and responsibility settle over him. He had been given a second chance, not just at his job, but at being better. Daniel's mother placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Make sure you lead with heart this time," she said. Marcus met her gaze and nodded. The restaurant moved forward. The kitchen flourished. And Marcus? He finally understood what it meant to be a true chef.